Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the very first In Publishing Insight webinar, a new golden age of print, lessons from the independent magazine scene, presented by Peter Houston. My name is James Everley and I'm the editor of In Publishing magazine. Just before we hand over to Peter, just a quick word about In Publishing, in case you're new to us. We are a leading source of news, authoritative comment and articles and features, and in-depth analysis on the UK publishing industry. We publish a bi-monthly print magazine called In Publishing, a weekly email newsletter, InPub Weekly, and a website, inpublishing.co.uk. Webinars are our first foray into live events, and we're putting on presentations on key areas of publishing strategy. We'll be running them monthly initially, certainly, hopefully maybe fortnightly later in the year, and they will all be free to attend via registration. Now, if you have any ideas on suggestions on subject matter which you would like covered in our webinar series, then please do email me direct. Likewise, if you have any feedback on today's webinar, I'd be delighted to hear from you. My email address is there. It's james.everley@inpublishing.co.uk. And in terms of sponsorship, if you might be interested in sponsoring a future webinar, then my colleague Martin Maynard would be delighted to hear from you. His email address is there too. It's martin.maynard@inpublishing.co.uk. Now, before I hand over to Peter, I'd just like to run three very quick polls just to get your idea on your thoughts on some publishing trends at the moment, especially in relation to print, because obviously that's what we're focusing on today. So there are the three questions, and I will launch them set individually. The first one is coming up in a second. Okay, the question there you can see is approximately what percentage of your current revenues derive from print products? Okay, if you're not a publisher, perhaps you're a supplier, then if you would tick the fifth option, that would be great. Otherwise, the 4 percentage bands are there. All right, give that a couple more seconds, and we'll close that one. All right, lovely. And now the second one coming up will be on your screen shortly. Okay, similar to the first, but looking ahead a couple of years, approximately what percentage of your revenues do you think will derive from print products in 2015? Again, if you're not a publisher, please tick the fifth option, otherwise the percentage bands are there. All right, I'll close that in a second. Thank you for taking part in that. And the third and final poll you should see there. And this is for publishers and non-publishers. How would you describe the future of magazines in print? What future? Short and painful, a slow, steady decline, niche but profitable, or ripe for reinvention? Okay, lovely. We'll close that in a second. Closing now. So well, thank you very much for your input on those. We will show the response to those polls at the end of the presentation, end of Peter's presentation, and we'll invite Peter to give a kind of instant thought on the figures. A golden age of print. Now, the format of today's webinar is that there'll be a 25-minute presentation from Peter, and that'll be followed by a 10-minute question and answer session. Now, if you have any questions you'd like to put to Peter during his presentation, then if you just type it into the question box on the control panel in front of you, I will then collate them during the presentation and then put as many as I can to Peter at the end of the session. Now, if we, for whatever reason, run out of time or don't get to your questions, then Peter will be happy to take up any follow-up questions after the event, and I'll leave his contact details on screen at the end. We are delighted to welcome Peter Houston to present our first webinar. Peter has worked in magazine publishing for over 25 years, formerly Group Content Director at Advanstar Communications. He is now an independent consultant and trainer. Peter has written 3 articles for us in the last year or so, most recently a superb piece for our July-August 2012 issue entitled Managing Content, Fairy Tale or Nightmare. Now you can read that and his other articles for us on the Knowledge Bank section of our website. But that's enough of me. You've tuned in to listen to Peter, so without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Peter.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much. Every time I hear that 25 years, it just makes me feel so old. I used to be quite proud of it. Now it just makes me feel old. Thank you, everyone, for logging in today. I truly hope you'll learn some useful lessons from an area of the magazine market that I see enjoying real growth, and that's the independent magazine scene. Hopefully I'll explain what that is and where the growth is and how you can learn from it. So just quickly take a look at what we're talking about today. Golden age of print is a big question mark on that one. I'm sure the guys at Newsweek would probably stop dead in their tracks if they heard anyone talking about the golden age of print with the unstoppable rise of digital, but we'll talk about it anyway. And then about the independent magazine scene, which is something that you may never have heard of, and I hope I can introduce you to that. And then the most important part, the lessons that I think we can learn, all around value, community, the content that you publish, the enabling factors of digital, and the fact that print still has a presence, it still punches above its weight. If you'll forgive me and I'll talk about myself for about 30 seconds. I was formerly the Group Content Director at Advanstar Communications in the Life Sciences Division. Advanstar is the biggest B2B publisher that you've never heard of, but they publish a lot of stuff from the States and quite a lot in Europe. I was with them for 5 years, left in November, and I'm now an independent trainer and a consultant helping publishers leverage their print operations to digital platforms. Now, that's not about ditching print, I hope, but developing a complementary cross-media offering. And that article that James talked about actually is all about cross-media. The Flipping Pages blog is a place where I share my thoughts, my opinions about magazines in both print and in pixels. So if you could have a look at that, I'd be eternally grateful. Okay, that's enough about me. A golden age of print. So that's kind of the reaction that I get sometimes. Are you completely mental? Golden age of print, really? You're trying to tell the guys that are on publications like Newsweek or whatever else that there is this golden age going on? Well, there's no doubt that print magazines are under pressure, but there are also areas where print is thriving. So that phrase, the golden age of print, I have to be honest, that's not my phrase. I stole it unashamedly from a catalogue for a magazine exhibition that was held in Cyprus late last year, early this year, organised by a guy called Peter Amian. And Peter writes that print magazine business has seen sales numbers and purchases constantly declining, but a second golden age can be seen emerging. How can that be? Well, people like Peter and the guy who actually coined that phrase originally in this context, Jeremy Leslie of the Mag Culture blog, talk about it in relation to independent magazines and the growth in the sector of these magazines that have just sort of sprung up in some sense. They've always been there in some ways. I'm sure the guys that have been publishing magazines for 10 years would be reasonably unhappy about me saying they've sprung up, but there's just so many coming in the last 18 months or so that there really is a real rebirth going on. And I think that can be put down very, very clearly to social media. Social media is spreading the buzz about these publications. It's an incredible communication channel for these magazines. Also, e-commerce is making it possible for people to actually buy them, to get their hands. They're not just talking about it, they're getting their hands on them. And that's due to the rise of the simplicity in some ways of e-commerce systems. There's a couple just come up in the last couple of months. A website called Magpile has a new e-commerce facility, and another one called Anikibo, both selling independent magazines. Also, there's been some coverage in what we consider mainstream media. So newspapers like The Guardian or even the New York Times talking about this phenomenon, and that's dragging people along and saying, what is this about? And what that's resulted for is this real explosion in these specific niches, particularly in fashion and design and cycling and food and drink. Now, if you think about it, what relates those sectors is an incredible passion for that subject matter. And that's really what's driving a lot of this growth. So just talk about a little bit of the evidence that this is going on. And I've talked and titled this session, or subtitled this session, the independent magazine scene. And you might say, well, there was a scene. Well, yeah, there is. There are events. Events like that Mag Dossier exhibition that I spoke about in Cyprus. But also in Edinburgh, there was an event called MagFest last year, run by Jeremy Leslie of Mag Culture blog. And events like Printout, again, with Jeremy and Steve Watchin of the Stack subscription service. Also virtual communities like Magpile, where people are actually gathering online to talk about these things and be part of this community. Blogs support it, these new retail sites, both physical shops, Magma, and sites like Anikibo. And there's personalities. With every great scene there are personalities, people that other people listen to. So Jeremy is one. That little picture on the bottom left-hand side there is Kai Brach. He's a guy who launched a magazine called Offscreen. And then there's regular media, like this radio program by the guys at Monaco, presented by Tyler Bruley, and all it talks about is print culture. So yes, there absolutely is a scene. Well, what is that scene centered on? What we've talked about is independent magazines. What defines these magazines? Well, they're not, you could call it in publishing an independent magazine. It's not owned by a big publishing company. James does so much of it himself with help. But these magazines typically are absolutely outside any kind of corporate structure. They're very niche. They stick to one subject and really, really hone in on that subject. They're not usually found in W.H. Smith, although some of them are starting to be. More importantly, they're content-led. They're all about the content. People aren't saying, well, I'm going to do this little advertising feature because these guys will give me some money. They're saying, is this subject interesting to the reader base? And they attack that with a real passion, whether that's cycling, or in the case of Hot Rum Cow, it's drinking, which is one of my favorites. They really, really get inside their subjects. They're so passionate about these subjects because they know their readers are going to be passionate about it. One other thing, they have incredibly high production values, high paper stock, high weight paper stocks, incredible design. Almost these magazines are almost like books, and they get talked about as objects of desire. And that's something I'll come back to in terms of how maybe you can learn something from these guys. What you can learn, well, if you're here to learn how to make money, just make money, then possibly you'll be disappointed. There's an old saying that the fastest way to make a small fortune, on magazines is to start with a large fortune. And these guys could tell you that story. What they will teach you how to do is how to make money by delighting an audience, how to really, really embed your brand within an audience. And that's what I want to talk about. And these are the lessons that, we can, it's always good to have bullet points. I think it's difficult to batten them down that way, but big lesson here is that 2 + 2 = 5, that the sum of the parts is greater, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, or whatever that. That's why I'm an editor and not a mathematician. How do you get to that equation? Well, value. If I was rewriting this slide, I would say value adds value, because value is that perception that something is really an object of desire, and that delivers a value to the reader. Content, which delivers community and binds that community together. That digital is an enabler. It's not just that death knell that we hear, it's an enabler. And as I've said just a second ago, print does punch above its weight. It does get attention. So go back to the value idea. These magazines cost money. That crappy Instagram photograph is some magazines on my desk. The one at the bottom that's £10 is Fire and Knives. The one that is £5 is Hot Rum Cow. These actually have a cover price. People are charging for these magazines. And the reason that they can do that, and particularly in the instances where they're charging £10 a shot and maybe more, is they have very high production values. Lovely paper, incredible photography, great design, and really good content. Targeted niche content that people want to read and will pay money to read. And that's where it becomes that object of desire. And ultimately, they become collectible. And I'll give you an example of that. Roller is a cycling magazine. It really is one of the sort of poster children of the independent magazine scene. That price, £180, that's not the cover price, you'll be sad to learn. What it is the price that issue 1 went for on eBay. So people are willing to pay for these things as collectibles. How nice would that be if someone would actually pay for your back issues at that sort of level? The other thing that I talked about in that little bullet point list was this idea of content creating community. This is a screenshot from the website magpile.com. Magpile bills itself as an online magazine community where people come online to talk about print magazines. And the league table there, if you like, is the most read magazines on Magpile. And what is actually going on there is that the readers of these magazines, the owners of the magazines, are coming along and they're saying, yes, I've got this magazine. Or they're saying, oh, you don't have my favorite magazine, I'm going to add it. I'm going to add a little review, I'm going to add a link to the website, I'm going to add their Twitter address. I'm actually going to tell everyone else in this community about a magazine that I love because I think they should know about it. And what's actually going on there is that magazines that can develop a unique following and unique content around that following develop these sort of tribal groups, what Seth Godin calls tribes, and they bring followers that becomes a sort of self-promotion, which helps the magazines get out on social media and wherever else to get an attention. The reason they do that, how they do that, these magazines are strange, they're quirky. The one right in the center there at 20 owners, Cover Junkie. This is an addiction to creative magazine covers that you want to lick. That magazine is all about magazine covers. That's fairly specialized, but people love it and it's fourth in that chart. So people love these things and they share them. Now what that to me shows is that digital, as I said, is not just the death knell of print, it can actually enable print. Social media, in the sense that it's a channel to get people to hear about you. It's another channel to get attention. Magazines are all about attention. Advertising is all about attention. Social media is just a different way to develop that attention for these magazines. But these guys don't use social media the way that I know of. I personally have been guilty of using it as a broadcast medium where it just becomes a conduit for links back to my website, my magazine content. They actually use it to engage the audience all the way through their publishing process. They're using it to let people inside the process, inside the brand, and make them feel that they are part of the brand. Next slide. I won't be through all these tweets. This is just a collection that I grabbed of different examples of these magazines and magazines publishers actually using Twitter in this instance to engage the audience, to make the audience feel like they're part of the process. So the first one in Little White Lies, it's a film magazine, they're talking about an interview and they want questions from the audience. Kai Brack, that we mentioned earlier on, he is looking for a photographer. He wants someone to take photographs for him in London because he's in Germany, or actually he may be in Australia. He's not going to pay them any money, but he'll give them a sub to the magazine. So again, whether one person takes up that offer or not, everyone that reads that magazine is all of a sudden understands the ethos that's behind Offscreen, his magazine. Anorak there is a kids magazine, and she's telling people that she's at the printers. And what that, if you can see it there, the link there is actually a Vine video, a 6-second video of the printing presses running. So it's not just, oh, we're at the printers. It's here's what the printing press actually looks like, and really bringing people inside. Stack's a subscription service. They're looking at a magazine that they may distribute. You know, there's that passion. I really can't wait to see that magazine, and he's showing a picture out of the magazine. Ride Journal, talking about his distributors or his retail stockists, with a great little message. How good is that stockist going to feel when he sees that tweet? Feel free to go visit your local stockist. And then the last one is something that we maybe do a little bit more of, and that's just telling people how great the audience actually thinks our publications are, but really getting inside that, giving that real personality, if you like. So just quick examples of how they're using social media to engage and communicate rather than just broadcast. I think that's hugely important. So looking at other ways that digital can enable print, e-commerce is huge for these guys. They're not, as I said, necessarily in W.H. Smith, although Roller actually is in W.H. Smith. Or if you're in another country, then Roller is probably in whatever your favorite magazine stockist news agent is. But what's interesting about this little screenshot, these guys are beating this e-commerce offering to death. It's not just, oh, you can buy our magazine. It's, here's a trial offer, here's an annual subscription, here's a gift subscription. And if you're on the website, they have a full archive of back issues that you can buy, so long as those not have been sold out, and they don't remove the ones that have been sold out. They're building on that idea that this is an object of desire. You really want to own this thing. Other ways of distribution that is enabled by digital. Stack is a sort of curated service that will deliver the best of these magazines to you. Anikibo is a new e-commerce site. Magma and Analog, they're both physical buildings that sell magazines, shops that sell magazines, but they're very heavily on social media. And they work hard to sort of raise the profile of the products or the publications that they're selling. And Work That Works there is just an awesome peer-to-peer distribution channel where readers can actually buy copies in bulk from distribution locations, from hubs, and then sell them on. So just really using the community to help with the distribution. Again, this is a little example of the Anorak guys, where they're actually really supporting the stockist. You have an image of the stockist who runs a children's clothing boutique. She stocks Anorak, and Anorak is incredibly grateful and makes sure that the world knows about that. So it's all about the community. It's all about using digital to actually help people understand how they can get their hands on your content, on your product. Moving on, this idea that print punches above its weight. I think sometimes we get all caught up in, oh, digital is the next big thing, and if I have an ebook on the iPad or a magazine on the iPad, people are going to give me attention. Sure, but print also gets attention. Little White Lies is a great opportunity of a company or a publishing company or magazine that has leveraged what they do into some other stuff. Church of London is a design agency that publishes Little White Lies. Little White Lies is a movie magazine that was basically started on a kitchen table by two students. They've gone on and they have this really nice, really well thought of movie magazine. They also publish the Think Quarterly for Google, which is a contract that they won on the back of their magazine and the design work. An incredibly high value publication that Google prints 2,000 copies and sends to the world's CEOs, all on the back of the print work that they did. That little picture in the middle there is actually of a limited edition woodblock print of the cover of that magazine, which they also sell on their website. So it's not just Google, there's other opportunities where you can take the magazine the work that's gone into the magazine and reap benefits from it in other places. They sell those prints. I bought one. Kindling Quarterly is, I just find this one amazing. I first read about the Kindling Quarterly in the New York Times. And the Kindling Quarterly is, again, two guys in Brooklyn who decided they were going to set up a magazine for dads, parenting magazine for fathers. And they got coverage in the New York Times. Now, that happens every now and again in other places, but for a tiny little magazine on its first issue to have a significant review, 1,000-word review, in the New York Times, I think is phenomenal. And the reason for that is because it's different, it's quirky, it's passionate, it's motivational. People think, wow, these guys have done something really, really interesting. And I think the print is what drives that. There's loads of people who have set up parenting for dads blogs. I've never seen one covered in the New York Times. So print has a weight and a credibility there that gets attention. And just one more example of that. Drag Mag, I have a sort of a tenuous personal connection here. The Oscar, the guy that started Drag Mag, went to art school with my son. And he decided, well, he was going to start a magazine, and he produced this magazine. It's a very arty magazine. It's fashion, but it's pretty off the wall. And he got it sponsored on some level by Diesel. Now, the actual deals of the sponsorship deal, or the actual details of the sponsorship deal, are kind of difficult to come by because Diesel has no real presence in there. They have distributed the magazine in some of their stores. I'm pretty sure they've paid some money. And they supply clothes for fashion shoots. But it's just an example of a brand, a big brand, that wants to be associated with something really edgy, with content that is quirky and unique and that gets attention. And I think, there's a lesson in that. If you can come up with something that's really interesting in the sector that you're in, it's not necessarily about having been publishing for 20 years or having the biggest circulation list on the planet. It really is about the content and the message and the product that you deliver, because people will buy into that. Okay, so just trying to sum up and draw a line under some of these lessons that you can take away. What all these guys have in common, I think, is they make beautiful magazines. Now, beautiful should probably be in inverted commas, because Drag Mag is not necessarily a beautiful magazine to everyone's take. It's very edgy, it's very unusual. But if you're into that kind of fashion, then it is an object of desire. It's something that you want to own it and keep it and refer back to it. And what these guys also do, besides making nice layouts and printing on nice paper, is they think differently. They think outside the box. They don't think, I've got to get 25,000 readers, I've got to get the biggest advertisers in the market to spend money with me. They think, well, if I just publish this, almost a publish and be damned attitude, then I'm going to get some attention and I can use that. And the reason that I think they get that attention is they're passionate. They love the subjects that they write about, whether that's food or cycling or whatever. Drink. Easy to get passionate about drink, but Hot Rum Cow does a great job of curating the best stories about drink into one place. Fire and Knives does the same thing with food. And I think the other thing that they do really, really well is they help readers share the passion. They get excited in the pages and they help readers share that excitement. They help readers really, really buy into the message, help readers become fans, if that's not a cliche. And the way they do that is really through social media as a communications vehicle, not as a pipeline to URLs, shortened URLs that are going to take you back to a website. Some of these magazines don't put any of their content on the web. You have to buy it. You have to buy the magazine. Sometimes they'll put out a digital edition that people can look at, usually after the next issues on the shelves. But by and large, they don't publish heavily on the web. They focus on the print. Whether, I'm not saying that's a good strategy for a commercial publisher, but it does show you that social media can drive people to a physical purchase. The other thing that I think they do very well is they collaborate very well within that scene. They talk about each other's publications. They compete for single issue sales, but they talk about each other. The drink magazines will talk about each other. The cycling magazines will talk about each other. There's a healthy rivalry, but they never try to pretend that the other guys don't exist because they're part of that scene. And I think there's something to be learned there from maybe print people trying to support each other and trying to tell a better story about print rather than always talking it down. And I think, you know, this last one, this play the long game, too often, I spoke about this last week, too often digital initiatives are introduced in reaction to a situation or in response to a potential advertiser opportunity. And that ends up with a sort of fragmented publishing strategy where print gets ignored and people are looking for short-term returns in digital. If you play the long game, then you've got to think about print being part of that publishing strategy. It's a cross-media strategy where we're actually saying, well, print's part of what we do and we should relate to digital in print and we should use digital as an enabler. And if you don't expect instant results with that, if you play the long game, I know your print products are under huge pressure, but if you look back at the lessons that are in here, I think if you add value, build community, use digital as an enabler, then I think print will last a lot longer than you actually might imagine that it could. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to James and I'll take some questions, I hope.
Hello, thanks Peter. That's a fascinating session, and we do have some questions for you, which we'll crack on straight away with. First of all, what kind of costs would you estimate to set up and distribute an indie print magazine?
I think it's probably lower than you would imagine. Distribution is less of an issue because what tends to happen is that people pay for the distribution as part of the purchase. So you're basically paying your own, where a more mainstream publisher will tend to say, here's my subscription fee, and I'll discount that because I want a whole bunch of readers so that I can get my circulation up and get advertising. These guys say, well, it's going to cost me £2 to post this thing, I'm going to charge you £2. In terms of the actual cost of the publications, completely depends on the paperweight and on the size of the publication. But, you know, these guys tend to run very small print runs. So look at £1.50 a copy is not unimaginable. So it depends really on the size. One of my favorites was actually an experimental project that the Anorak, the children's magazine Anorak did. And they did their magazine's for kids, and it's called Anorak. They published a magazine for adults, and they called it Curated. But they printed only 1,000 copies, and it actually has it's like a limited edition. That number is on the back, and you get a 1 of 1,000 or 15 of 1,000 or whatever. So again, it's not all about the print run. It's not about how many you want to produce. It's about, can you sell what you produce at a profit?
Okay, brilliant. Peter, another one for you. An attendee says, recently launched a B2B magazine, / journal in PDF and flip mag format. Would you suggest a print version to get ads and to monetize?
The problem with getting ads is going to be what's your circulation. So the first thing I would say is you need to look at bundling that. Whatever you're doing in digital, you make sure that that reach, if you like, is part of what you do in print. I had a conversation the other day where someone says, "Oh, all print is going to go free, like the Evening Standard or Time Out," and I vehemently disagreed with that because I think paid for print is interesting because you can make a profit on it. But if you're looking at advertising, then we will start to talk about the numbers game. So I think there you've got to really use digital again as an enabler where you can bundle the reach in terms of what you do in print and what you do in digital. And in that sense, maybe the print becomes a premium product, which is, only for people that really, really want print, and you have to come up with some sort of content strategy that differentiates it a little bit from the digital aspect, if that makes sense.
No, it certainly does. Peter, another one. Do you think visual perception plays a key part?
Yes, huge, absolutely huge. I'm on a website, and you know, there's some beautiful websites out there, there really are, but almost every website looks very, very much the same, to me anyway. You know, you can almost draw the grids, and that's true of magazine publishing as well. I think commercial magazine publishing, the grids tend to be very samey, and we publish on a template sort of format. These magazines blow that apart. Their spreads can be just a headline, or they can use illustration in ways that you wouldn't normally use illustration. You know, what I would say is I'd advise people to try and get their hands on one of these things, and it's not just visual, it's tactile as well. The feel, the look of these things, even the smell of them, if that doesn't make me sound too strange, really, really is it's a full physical experience from that point of view.
Okay, great, Peter. I've got another one. I'm going to read this out. It's quite a small window, so I'm going to have to kind of arrow through it. Great presentation, Peter, he says, but aren't you just talking about a cottage industry that's always been there? I'd be interested to hear where the revenues are in independent magazines. How many copies does Little White Lies sell, for example? Where are their revenue splits between ads, subs, online, etc.?
Okay, go back to the beginning of that, and I would say yes and no. I think a big number of these magazines are absolutely cottage industries. These guys have day jobs for the most part. There's actually an independent magazine about people's day jobs. What do people do for a living? So yes, is probably the overarching answer to that. I don't think that means that we as commercial publishers can't learn from the techniques that you use. I think you can take the techniques that an independent magazine has used to develop its audience online and in social media and apply it directly to a B2B magazine, for example. One of the big things about independents is they really make a big deal about their cover art. They use Pinterest or whatever, and they have a collection of covers. Why can't you do that for a science magazine? Before I left my last job, we talked about having a social media competition saying, what is the oldest copy of the magazine that you have? Take a picture of the cover and post it on social media. Actually, for in publishing, I could do that for in circulation. I have a 2008 copy of In Circulation, James, that we could do that with.
I'd like to think it's worth a bomb, but we can try it. We can try it.
So I think you can use the techniques in a commercial area. If you really want to make money from an independent magazine, then I think Little White Lies is not a great example because those guys are in W.H. Smith. I don't know how many copies they sell. I don't know the split between subscription and ad revenue, but they're playing a different game from someone like Hot Rum Cow, which is a startup and is really, you know, publishing it to almost, I don't want to speak on behalf of the publisher, but I'm sure that he's publishing that to get attention for what he does rather than as a profit vehicle necessarily, certainly in the first instance.
Peter, how about sponsorship as an alternative to traditional advertising?
Absolutely. That's what DragMag did, and also Offscreen. Offscreen is a publication, I think it's on its 4th or 5th issue. It was launched by a web designer, a German guy who lives in Australia, and I think, if I'm off the top of my head, I think he got 6 sponsors and that was it. He just said, these guys are my sponsors, these are helping me out, give them some love on Twitter and whatever. They appear in the magazine, and I think that's a great way to go, because you're not dealing with that numbers game. One of the things that I think the independents have been very good at is the idea of punching above their weight. There's a magazine published by the Modernist Society in Manchester. They do a limited run, again with that number 1 of 700 on the back. those guys get incredible attention. They don't get huge revenues from advertising, but they do get attention in terms of this is a great publication. So I think if you can mix that up in a more commercial area rather than modernist architecture, then I think sponsorship is a real viable alternative. And I think then it's about tying the content and the message that you're delivering through that content and the community that you're building around that content, tying that directly to what your sponsors are trying to achieve. If they want to be part of that community.
Right. I know we've got a few left. I'm going to throw one more at you, Peter, and then we'll look at the poll results. Would you have any tips for what content to put on your website so you don't give away your printed content?
That's a huge one.
In 30 seconds.
Well, I think that the thing there is really to differentiate it. Again, I can't remember if it was delayed gratification or justified has developed a blog which they publish very frequently compared to a magazine. And I'm sure it's delayed gratification. With the magazine's all about slow lifestyles and slow journalism. And their blog is updated regularly because it's different stuff than is in the magazine. As long as you're buying into or sort of keeping that ethos of your community going, then make it different.
Excellent. Peter, I know there are a number of questions we haven't had a chance to get to, but I think you said you'd be happy to take, answers via email at a later date.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, and Peter's contact details are on screen at the moment, so I'm afraid we didn't get round to all the questions, but please do email Peter, and he'll come back to you, in due course. I think we've just got time to look at the poll results for the polls we ran earlier. And we're going to put Peter on the spot and ask for his instant feedback. Let's see, let's launch the results from the first one. Okay. Peter, can you see the results from the first question there?
Yep.
That was the question, do you have any, sorry, that was the question 2. Approximately what percentages of your current revenues derive from print products? What are your instant thoughts on that?
I'm not surprised. I think most people still have a significant portion of their revenue coming from print. I think it's interesting that there is that group that's fallen below or made it below, depending on how you look at it, 25%. But I'm not surprised by that. I think what really that says to me is cross-media, print and digital is what it's all about. It has to be what it's all about.
Okay, lovely. Let's put the results from the next question. This is the ones for 2 years ahead, 2015. Same question, but 2015.
Well, the big surprise there is it doesn't really seem that different, which is encouraging because I think there's not too many people saying 0. There's still people saying it's going to be around somewhere between, I don't know, 25, 50%, 70% even. So that's encouraging from a print perspective. I think if people are going to rely too much on print, then they're going to have to really think about what they're doing with that print. But again, to me that says it's all about cross-media. It's about both print and digital.
Okay, lovely. And the third question, results on screen now. How would you describe the future of print?
Well, I'm really good no one said what future, because that would have been depressing. I like the idea that people are seeing that it is, it's going to be niche, but there's money there, and there is a future from that point of view. I personally, my personal response there would have been ripe for reinvention, because I think what people really need to do is build it into, I'm in danger of boring everyone here with this cross-media thing, but it's got to be about digital and print. It's print plus or digital plus. So from that point of view, we've got to look at these products and figure out how they work together.
Lovely. Peter, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Steve, for a fascinating presentation and for obviously answering all the questions and being put on the spot with your response to the poll.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
And that brings us almost to the end of today's webinar. I just highlight the May-June issue of In Publishing magazine. Peter will be writing an article for the issue based on some of the things he's spoken about today. So there'll be, do look out for that. If you're not on the mailing list already, you can register via our website, www.inpublishing.co.uk. The registration link is at the top right-hand corner. We also have an on-demand tab on the webinars page on our website. So we will be putting a recording of today's webinar up on that shortly, hopefully by the end of the week, and we'll drop you a line to let you know when that's live. Just a quick mention of our next webinar, just over a month's time, Tuesday the 9th of April at 2:30, presented by Rebecca Billingsley. And the title of that webinar is How to Measure the Success of Your Digital Magazine, the main KPIs and how to measure them. And we'll be putting a lot more detail about that on our website, again, hopefully by the end of the week. But for now, from myself, James Evely, and from Peter Houston, thank you very much for listening, and good afternoon.